Hey everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we're going to show you how to securely connect to a remote MySQL database on private EC2 using an SSH tunnel with MySQL Workbench. This is an essential skill for anyone working with databases in a cloud environment like AWS. So, let's get started. The MySQL database we want to access lives on a private EC2 instance within a VPC private subnet. This means it doesn't have a public IP address for direct internet connection, which is great for security. However, it also makes it inaccessible from our local machine. To overcome this hurdle, we'll leverage a Bastian host. A Bastian host or a jump host is a secure gateway within the same VPC but in a public subnet. It has a public IP address, allowing us to connect to it from the internet. We'll establish an SSH tunnel between our local machine and the Bastion host. This tunnel acts like a secure, encrypted pathway. We can then use it to forward our connection to the private EC2 instance where our MySQL database resides. Once the SSH tunnel is set up, it's like having a direct line to the private database. We can then use MySQL Workbench on our local machine to connect to the database just as if it were a local one. Before we dive into the setup, let's go over what you'll need to follow along with this tutorial. Here are the prerequisites. First, make sure you have MySQL Workbench installed on your local machine. This tool will help us connect and manage our MySQL database. You need a VPC with one public subnet and one private subnet. This network configuration will enable us to use a Bastion host to access the private EC2 instance. You'll need two EC2 instances deployed within this VPC. An EC2 instance in the public subnet with default configurations. This instance will act as our gateway to the private subnet. An EC2 instance in the private subnet with default configurations. This instance will host our MySQL database. If you need help setting up the VPC and EC2 instances, I have a detailed video that walks you through the entire process. You can find the link to that video in the description below. Now that we've covered the prerequisites and the architecture, it's time to update the security groups of our EC2 instances for better security. I hope you already have the VPC setup I mentioned earlier. First, we'll update the security group for our EC2 instance in the public subnet, which is our Bastion host. Find the security group associated with your Bastion host and click on it. Under the Inbound Rules tab, ensure you have a rule that allows SSH, port 22, traffic. For better security, specify your local IP address instead of allowing access from anywhere. However, for simplicity, I'll show you the rule allowing access from anywhere. Now, check the Outbound Rules tab and ensure there is a rule allowing all traffic to anywhere. Next, we'll update the security group for our EC2 instance in the private subnet, which hosts our MySQL database. Find the security group associated with your MySQL server instance and click on it. Under the Inbound Rules tab, add a rule to allow SSH, port 22, traffic only from the security group of the Bastion host. This ensures that only the Bastion host can SSH into the MySQL server. Also, add a rule to allow MySQL/Aurora, port 3306, traffic from the security group of the Bastion host. This allows MySQL connections forwarded through the Bastion host. Check the Outbound Rules tab and ensure there is a rule allowing all traffic to anywhere. By updating these security groups, we've ensured that our instances are both secure and accessible as needed. The public EC2 instance, or Bastion host, allows SSH access from anywhere for simplicity, while the private EC2 instance only allows SSH and MySQL traffic from the Bastion host. Now that we've configured our security groups, let's move on to connecting to our private EC2 instance via the Bastion host. First, we need to change the permissions of our SSH key to ensure it's secure. Next, we need to start the SSH agent if it's not already running. After starting the SSH agent, add your key to the agent. Now, we'll SSH into the Bastion host with agent forwarding enabled. This will allow the Bastion host to use our private key to connect to the private EC2 instance. Once connected to the Bastion host, SSH into the private EC2 instance using its private IP address. Now that we're connected to our private EC2 instance via the Bastion host, let's proceed with installing MySQL. Follow these steps to ensure a successful installation. First, we need to download the MySQL repository package. Let's see if it is downloaded. Next, we need to install the MySQL repository package we just downloaded. Now, let's import the GPG key to verify the packages we install from the MySQL repository. Update the package index to ensure we have the latest information from the MySQL repository. With the repository and GPG key in place, we can now install the MySQL server. Once the installation is complete, start the MySQL service. To ensure MySQL starts automatically when the instance boots, enable the MySQL service. Let's find the temporary root user password for our MySQL. Finally, run the MySQL secure installation script to improve the security of your MySQL server. This script will guide you through setting a root password, removing anonymous users, disallowing root login remotely, and removing the test database. Now that we've successfully installed MySQL, let's create a database and set up a separate user for remote access with minimal privileges. This ensures better security and restricts access to only the necessary database. First, we'll log into the MySQL server as the root user. You will be prompted to enter the root password you set during the secure installation. Once logged in, let's create a new database. Next, we create a new user named remote user with a strong password. Now, we grant remote user full access only to our database. Finally, we need to flush the privileges to ensure that the changes take effect. With our database created and the remote user set up with the appropriate privileges, we're ready to connect to our MySQL database remotely using MySQL Workbench. In the next parts, I'll show you how to create an SSH tunnel and configure MySQL Workbench to connect through the SSH tunnel. Now that we've set up our MySQL database and user, let's create an SSH tunnel to securely connect to our MySQL database from our local machine using MySQL Workbench. Follow these steps to set up the SSH tunnel. Now that we have set up our SSH tunnel, let's test it by connecting to the remote MySQL database using the terminal. If the setup is successful, we should be able to connect without any issues. Now that we've set up our MySQL database and SSH tunnel, let's connect to our MySQL database using MySQL Workbench via standard TCP/IP. Follow these steps to configure the connection. First, open MySQL Workbench on your local machine and click on the plus icon to create a new connection. Enter a name for your connection. Select standard TCP/IP as the connection method. Enter localhost or localhost IP as the host name, since we're connecting through the SSH tunnel to the local port. Enter 3307 as the port, which is the local port we set up in the SSH tunnel. Enter remote user as the MySQL username. Click on Store in Keychain and enter the password for remote user. Click on Test Connection to verify that everything is set up correctly. If the connection is successful, you should see a message indicating that the connection was successful. Click OK to save the connection. Now, double-click the new connection to connect to the MySQL database. With these steps, you've successfully connected to your MySQL database using MySQL Workbench via standard TCP/IP. You can now manage your database as if it were running locally. So, let's create a new table in our database. Let's connect to our MySQL database using MySQL Workbench via standard TCP/IP over SSH. Click on the plus icon to create a new connection. Enter a name for your connection. Select standard TCP/IP over SSH as the connection method. Enter the public IP address of your Bastian host, followed by port 22. Enter EC2 user or the username you use to SSH into your EC2 instance. Click on the button next to SSH key file and navigate to the location of your private key file and select it and click Open. Enter the private IP address of your private EC2 instance. Enter 3306 as the MySQL port. Enter remote user as the MySQL username. Click on Store in Keychain and enter the password for remote user. Click on Test Connection to verify that everything is set up correctly. If the connection is successful, you should see a message indicating that the connection was successful. Click OK to save the connection. Now, double-click the new connection to connect to the MySQL database. Now that we are successfully connected to our database, we try to insert one record into our table and see if it is working. Now, we'll try to edit an existing record. Since the user has edit permissions, the operation should be successful. Next, we'll attempt to delete a record. Since the user has delete permissions, the operation should be successful. Finally, let's see if this user can create a new schema. With limited user permissions, this operation should be denied. Alright everyone, that's all I have for today. I hope you found this video helpful in the context of cloud computing. See you next time with another exciting topic. Leave a comment below with any questions you have. Don't forget to subscribe for more exciting tutorials. I've also included a link in the description below to a detailed article about this topic.